Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Robo Celestial here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 8 of What If Deku Had the Sharingan. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. As everyone else chatted away about various subjects in whatever groups they split up into, Izuku sat with Mineta. The two were starting to feel anxious, and he figured that since he was going to be doing some breathing exercises, he might as well help Mineta calm down as well. Slowly breathe in, hold, slowly breathe out. The two were making some good progress and feeling pretty calm since they began the exercise. Their little therapy session, however, was cut short by Shoto Todoroki. The taller teen stood in front of the other two and stared at them with an aloof expression. Do you need something, Todoroki? Midoriya wasn't all that familiar with Shoto. He tended to primarily stick to his group of friends, and Shoto typically to stay alone. Needless to say, it was bizarre, and the silence that droned on after Midoriya's question was quickly becoming awkward. Everyone soon began noticing that the two boys seemed to be having some sort of confrontation. Objectively speaking, I'm stronger than you. At best, you're almost as capable as me. Midoriya didn't respond. He didn't know how to respond to such a declaration. Bakugo, on the other hand, responded immediately. Boisterous laughter burst from the young man as he fell back. He took his chair along for the ride down. The blonde tumbled with a loud bang as the chair meeting with the floor. After a while, Bakugo collected himself and got up with the biggest grin any of his classmates had ever seen plastered on his face. Listen here, you two-toned umbus. I'm the only one here capable of beating Deku. He's second to none other than me. You got that half and half. No one could gauge Shoto's reaction. His face remained expressionless as another silence settled in. The tension building in the air was so thick, not even a chainsaw would be able to cut through it. Midoriya looked between the two boys, and an almost nervous, awkward smile crept its way onto him. We'll find out who the best in the school is when this is all over. I'm not going to hold back when we're all aiming for the top. As he spoke, Midoriya shifted his gaze towards the entire class. Determination was evident, not only on his face, or even just his tone of voice. His whole body radiated with the feeling. He was out to win, and he made it clear that everyone else should be too. Right as Iida was going to try and rein everyone in from what had just occurred, static of the speakers kicked in. Present Mick's voice boomed in, announcing that the first years should be heading out to the stage. As the first years walk onto their battlefield, murmurs, shouts, and cheers could be heard from the crowd. Each class was introduced by the screeching voice of Present Mick as they entered the field. Those that weren't part of the hero course quickly noted how lackluster their introductions were compared to those that were. It was disheartening for them, but no one had time to dwell on it. The R-rated hero Midnight walked out onto the stage in attire that made many people question why she was in a high school, let alone refereeing the first years. With some interruptions and the crack of her whip, she introduced Bakugo as the class representative that would be giving the speech. The bleached blonde-haired boy calmly made his way to the stage. Everyone but Midoriya voiced their disbelief at who had been chosen to represent the first years. He wasn't exactly a bad person, but his vulgar vocabulary left much to be desired. He stared off into the distance with an uncharacteristically calm expression on his face as he waited for everyone to quiet down. It didn't take long. The athlete's oath, make no mistake about it. I'm gonna take first place. Everyone except Midoriya reacted in one of three ways: silent shock, protests in horror, and verbal vomit of rage. Midoriya knew how serious Bakugo was taking this, even if their new friends didn't. You wanna prove me wrong, quit whining and prove your worth, you extras. After Bakugo's last statement, he walked off stage. People continued to protest his speech as he walked back to his class. A couple of students that had started to get to know the passion-filled boy quickly stopped any protesting they had and began contemplating his words. It started to dawn on them that what initially seemed to be overconfidence and arrogance might have been something else entirely. What it might have been, they weren't sure, though. The sea of participants didn't have time to linger on Bakugo. As soon as he was back with the rest of Class 1, Midnight began announcing what the qualifiers would be. Gesturing to the screen behind her with her entire body, the words "obstacle course race" popped up. With their fate decided, the students gathered around the small mechanical gate with traffic lights on it. As the entrance slowly opened, each consecutive light blinked on until all three were lit, and their entry to the first challenge was open. Everyone moved at once, rushing to get ahead of each other, and became a human avalanche. The opening they were given led to a narrow hallway that halted the struggling mob of riled-up contestants. It was clear to many of them that this would be their first real challenge. Todoroki was the first to move. He'd gotten ahead of the crowd early and froze the majority of them to the ground. As the heterochromous boy ran forward, he took a glance back to check who was still in the running. As he expected, everyone from his class except Mineta had been able to avoid his attack. To his surprise, though, plenty of people outside the hero course were skilled enough to as well. Shortly after they escaped from the clog of students, they were met with a large cluster of foe villains with a disturbing amount of zero-pointers among them. With a smirk, Todoroki froze the robots, with most of the others not realizing how unsteady and off-balance they were. Shortly after he passed between them, the mechanical menses began to tip and fall over, nearly crushing many of the more naive competitors. To the surprise of some, 2 students did end up seemingly crushed under the fake villains, but quickly broke through and began charging forward. Bakugo and Midoriya lead the pack in going over the moving obstacles. With Bakugo's explosions, he practically flew over the metal menses. Midoriya, on the other hand, charged up 1 for all to 5% and maneuvered the robots in a manner reminiscent of Kamui Woods. He might not have been able to use his Sharingan, but his body still remembered how the pro moved. Before we get back into the story, I would like to say that we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes over the hard facts of the anime presented. Now, in case you guys didn't know, we have a third channel called Anime Theory. Anime Theory mainly focuses on a large variety of mind-boggling anime theories. If you are interested in content like this, please go check the description below or click the eye icon in the top right corner. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back into the story. It didn't take long for the 2 second-place holders to reach the next part in the race. Platforms of Earth extended out of a seemingly endless chasm and were connected at odd angles by rope. Neither bothered slowing down to take it in or use the cords. Izuku upped his power outage to 8% and leapt from platform to platform, while his best friend flew above him with the force of his quirk. They were still neck and neck, neither able to gain the upper hand on the other for even a second. As they cleared the canyon, the 2 caught up to first place. Todoroki's pause to take in the fact that the students would be crossing a minefield cost him first place. He was passed by Midoriya and Bakugo. They were both using the full output of their quirks by this point, both gain first place and to attack each other. They were neck and neck at first place while being at each other's necks. Bakugo fired off explosions at Midoriya, and in return, the Viridian-eyed boy grabbed at and elbowed the explosive blonde. The one-for-all user was holding a steady 10% of his power and using careful footing to propel himself forward and seemingly glide right above the ground. As the 2 rivals started getting near the end of the field, Midoriya knew what he had to do. Todoroki was gaining on him, and it was blatant that he could lose the round to either of the boys near him. He planned his next step carefully. Midoriya upped the amount of 1 for all he was using for a brief moment to 15%. His body couldn't handle that much power for long, but it was just long enough for what he needed. His foot landed on the ground once more. As he shot himself forward and ahead of Bakugo, explosion after explosion went off behind him and furthered the lead he gained. He avoided stepping on any of the mines directly to avoid getting caught in the detonation. Instead, Midoriya used just enough force close enough to one of the clusters in the ground. By the time the smoke cleared, his rivals in the trial had lost track of him. Not long after he disappeared, Present Mick announced Izuku Midoriya had gotten first place. Having finally reached the light at the end of the tunnel, pride and relief filled Midoriya as it was announced that he got first place. Not even a minute after him, Bakugo landed in second and Todoroki in third. Midoriya didn't have much time to celebrate his victory, though. As soon as Bakugo had collected himself a little, he ran at the freckle-faced boy while shouting Deku at him as loud as he could. When he tried tackling the first-place winner to the ground as revenge for stealing the win from him, but the 2 ended up locking hands and trying to wrestle each other to the ground. Damn it, Deku. What the hell was that bullshit? You asshole. Despite Bakugo's venom's tone, the expression he wore on his face was a somewhat friendly one. I can't do it for long, but I can use about 15% of 1 for all now. That extra training really put me ahead of you. The smile on Midoriya's face more than gave away how much he enjoyed roughhousing with his childhood friend. Kaken slammed his head into Deku's after hearing the last part. This doesn't mean shit. I still got the rest of the sports festival to kill you. The forest green-haired boy pushed back against his sharp-eyed rival, putting them at a stalemate. Eventually, they had to be forcefully separated so that everyone could continue on with the event. The entirety of Class 1 had ended up barely making it through the event, with Mineta ending up in last place. Now that everyone was sorted and knew who was going into the next part of the festival, Midnight announced and explained the cavalry battle. Everyone's heads turned to Midoriya when it was explained that first place had 1 million points. It was at that moment that he knew he would be everybody's target. As the rules were elaborated on, Midoriya wondered how people would react. He assumed an adequate amount of people would want to avoid being on his team since he was the biggest target. When it finally became time to make teams, he was right, in a sense. There were unquestionably tons of people who wanted nothing to do with him, but he didn't expect to get nearly the attention that he did. Picking people to be on his team had been far harder than he expected, but not for the reasons he initially though. All the parties ended up being settled rather quickly and chaotically. He made the best team he could given the options that he had, and it wasn't an inadequate group at all. With the people he picked, he was more than confident that they would take first place and ensure that they make it to the last event at the sports festival. Thank you all for watching the video to the end.